What's up everyone? In this video today, I'm going to be talking about how to shoot high scores, good scores, in windy conditions. See you in a second. Alright, so there's a really good chance that if you're shooting a lot of shells, if you're going to competitions regularly, you're probably going to have to deal with windy conditions at some point, or maybe even multiple points throughout the trap shooting season. And actually, they can be used to an advantage because not everybody knows how to shoot good scores in windy conditions. So if you're one of those shooters that you do know how to break good scores, you know how to break consistent scores in windy conditions, it's going to give you an edge over most of the shooters out there because all of a sudden you're not going to waver that much over your scores whenever you're shooting in the wind or in tough conditions that, you're going out there, maybe it's 40, 50, 60 mile an hour winds. It can be pretty tough to shoot. So one instance of this that I remember from my shooting experience is at the Missouri Fall Handicap. I believe it was in 2015 that actually the porta potties were literally blowing over because the wind was so strong. And this was in the fall, so it was like 50 degrees outside, so you compound that with a 40 mile an hour wind. It was pretty tough shooting, especially handicaps. But some of the shooters were still able to break consistently good scores. They were still able to break 90-ish or a little bit above, especially in the handicaps. It's so tough in long yardage handicaps to be consistent, to consistently break 90 or above. It's very difficult in the windy conditions, but the guys that were able to do that, stay in that 90 range, maybe only dip it down below into that maybe 88 or 89, but they avoided that 70 or that 60 or that low 80 that ultimately will eliminate you from contention in a high overall or a high all around scenario. They were able to avoid that score buster, if you will, that would eliminate them and consistently break high scores. So I want to talk about some of the things that you need to be aware of when you're shooting in those type of windy conditions and kind of go over some things that can help you out there. So let's go ahead and get right to it here. The first thing that is the key to being a good shooter in windy conditions is setting your hold point. So to do this, you have to have an awareness of where the wind is coming from and exactly what it is doing to the target. So for example, is the wind coming from the south? So if it's coming this way, it's probably going to push the targets down, right? So that means you're going to have to lower your hold point. Vice versa, if it's coming from the north, then you're going to have to raise your hold point up a little bit. Or if it's a crosswind either way, that's probably the trickiest one to figure out because some of the targets it's going to make go higher, some of the targets it's going to make go lower. So the first key to this is to set your hold point. And like I said, that requires an awareness of actually understanding exactly which way the wind is blowing from and exactly how that's going to affect the targets, which means you're going to have to be analyzing because that may change throughout the day. So it's something you have to be constantly aware of. Second thing that you really need to do to shoot high scores in windy conditions is to be consistent fundamentally. So many shooters, and I've been guilty of this myself, especially when I was first starting out, is if it's really windy outside, you can kind of let it get you out of your game, let it get out of your normal, consistent routine and groove. That's really the worst thing you can do. You want to try to stay focused on exactly what your keys are, what you think that you need to be doing, what your game plan is, you've been working on in practice. So for example, if you're somebody that struggles with keeping your head on the gun, you're probably going to have a harder time keeping your head on the gun in a north wind because that target's just going to be going up higher, which means you're going to naturally want to just go like this, look at it. So that's the worst thing you can do. Believe me, I've been there and done that, and it results in a lost target almost every time. So you want to try to remember those things that are your keys that have helped you break high scores in the past, whether it be keeping your head on the gun, or the first key that we talked about, setting a good hold point, making sure your stance is correct. And that leads me right into my third point, is getting that stance set correct. It is key that you adjust your stance. So if that wind's coming in a direction that's going to make that left-hand target go further, you got to adjust your stance for that. If you're a right-hand shooter and you're shooting on post 1, for example, you're going to need to open up more if that left-hand target is going further. But obviously if you're a left-handed shooter, you're probably going to want to close off a little bit more towards that target, just to make sure you have enough room for movement to go break that target, that you're not going to get locked up and run out of room because you didn't have your stance set properly. Because if you don't have your stance set properly, you're never really going to have a chance to go break that target because you're going to run out of room to move with your body. Okay, so the last thing that I think you need to do to shoot consistent scores in windy conditions is to practice in them. This is something that can help you out quite a bit, and it's something that I see guys a lot of times. They say, well, it's too windy to go shoot today, I'm not going to go shoot. Or maybe they're out there and the wind comes up, and then they just decide to stop shooting because the wind's coming up. Now, I understand sometimes you don't want to practice every single time in the wind because that can hurt your fundamentals. But you really do need to practice sometimes in the wind because you're never really going to know how to adjust in this scenario if you're not practicing. So make sure you get out there and practice a little bit in the wind whenever you're doing your normal practice times. Make sure to schedule one that, hey, you know, this is a little bit windy day, let's go ahead and go out there and shoot. I can tell you personally, I've learned a lot from those experiences. So these are just a few tips for shooting in the wind. This is by no means an all-inclusive list. You know, I didn't throw everything out there. There's certainly more to shooting in the wind than one video could cover. But these are some tips that I think if you do these things well, if you really focus on them shooting in the wind, you're going to break high scores. I've seen guys go out there 40, 50 mile an hour winds and from long yardage still breaking in 90s, which is just incredible. It's a very difficult thing to do. You know, it's easier whenever you're up there on the 16-yard line. You're shooting singles or doubles. If you have that wind, it's easier to adjust, and once you start getting back into the long yardage, that's really where you're going to see the difference as far as the difficulty level. It goes up a little bit because you have to have everything more in line. You know, long yardage, it's a true test, if you will, of how fundamentally sound of a shooter you are, because if you're not fundamentally sound, then you know it's going to be exposed from back there in the way to the 16-yard line. You just won't quite expose it. So thank you guys so much for watching today. I really appreciate it. You can subscribe to my channel here. I'd appreciate it if you did that. You can also watch another video here. Thank you guys for watching. Go have a great rest of your day.